UFC Fight Night, Taira versus Park, took place at the Apex on Saturday night, where Tatsuro Taira beat Hyun Sung Park by submission in the second round. Now, overall, this was a pretty decent card. We had impressive wins by Austin Bashi, Rinya Nakamura, Kevin Vellejos, Ribovics, Chris Duncan, and, of course, Tatsuro Taira. Now, I'm going to go through and I'm going to highlight a few of the big wins here and who some fighters should be fighting next. Now, Esteban Ribovics is pretty much a fan favorite at this point, given that, he looks to do damage in all of his fights. He always pushes the pace. He's on the front foot trying to just hurt his opponent. Now, I believe the UFC should reward this kind of mentality with fighting up the rankings per se. Obviously I don't think Esteban Ribovics deserves a ranked opponent quite yet. However, I do feel as though he should fight somebody the UFC, it might have been in the rankings beforehand. He might have, it might just be right outside the rankings. I think Esteban Ribovics should be fighting the winner of Jared Gordon versus Rafa Garcia. Now, why I think this, I think Jared Gordon's going to beat Rafa Garcia. That fight takes place in September. I think that Esteban Ribovics versus Jared Gordon would be a fantastic fight. Both fighters not looking to switch it up, and I think the UFC needs to reward these kinds of fights. So give Ribovics Jared Gordon, or if Rafa Garcia wins, give him Rafa Garcia. Now, moving on to another extremely impressive performance was Chris Duncan. I don't think anybody had Chris Duncan winning out of the people that I watch, out of the people that I know and have talked to. I think we all had Mateusz Rebecki to win this fight based on how he performed against Orobly. Now, Chris Duncan pulled it out. Chris Duncan was the taller fighter, and he fought like the taller fighter. He kept the range. He exchanged. He had to get inside on Chris Duncan, and he did, but I personally thought that Ribovics was going to crack Chris Duncan and end up putting him away. That just didn't happen. Chris Duncan showed dog in him that I didn't think he had, and I shouldn't have ever doubted the Scots. My king, Paul Craig, he's the lineal light heavyweight champion, by the way. Paul Craig, they just have it in him. I actually have some Scotch in me too, but I don't think I have that kind of dog in me. So, the opponent I think Chris Duncan should be facing next is actually the loser of Jared Gordon and Rafa Garcia. Now, Chris Duncan, I think he's a little lower on the pegging list than Kevin Vallejos is. I think that Chris Duncan, again, he's just so slow on the feet. I don't know. I really don't know how his chin held up against Rebecki. And I think had Mateusz's Rebecki hematoma on his eye not completely disabled him, per se, that he would have done a little better. But I can't discredit Chris Duncan for his performance. It was an absolutely amazing performance. And in that, I think he deserves to fight up the hidden rankings and fight a guy in Rafa Garcia, assuming he loses to Jared Gordon, which isn't a guarantee. However, I think that would be an interesting fight. It gets Chris Duncan an opponent where it'd be a good scrap. It's not going to be one-sided. And ultimately, I think it's a win-win for both parties. Now, before we move on to Tatsuro Taira's next opponent, I want to discuss another fighter that was prominent throughout the main card, and that's Kevin Vellejos. Now, Kevin Vellejos, he needs an opponent that gets his name out there to the more casual than me fan, and I think that guy is Nate the motherfucking Train. I think Nate the Train gets his name out there. I think Kevin Vellejos absolutely pieces Nate the Train up, but Nate's kind of got that dog in him to where he won't get put away unless he gets absolutely slept, which is a possibility. Kevin Vellejos is a super athlete, extremely fast twitch, and he could put Nate away early. I think that is the fight to make, or you match him with Sadiq Youssef. Now, I think Kevin Vellejos beats Sadiq Youssef. However, I think Sadiq can switch it up, and Kevin Vellejos, he hasn't really been tested too much on the ground. And Sadiq's he's not a slouch. Like, you look at Sadiq Youssef, he is an athletic guy. So I personally would do Kevin Vellejos versus Nate the Train. However, you could also throw Sadiq Youssef in there if you want to as well. Now, moving on to the main event, Tatsuro Taira, he submitted Hyun Sung Park in round number 2. I mean, as far as that breakdown goes, we can't look too much into it. I mean, Hyun Sung Park took the fight on a few days' notice. He was training for Steve Erceg. Steve Erceg, I shouldn't put it that way. Steve Erceg is a very, very crafty guy on the feet. But Steve Erceg was never looking to wrestle with Hyun Sung Park. And it showed. Hyun Sung Park, he just didn't have the capabilities to keep up with Tatsuro Taira. He didn't. And, no discredit to him. Like, what if I'm going into a training camp and I'm focusing on beating the number 10 UFC ranked lightweight in the world, I am going to put all my focus into what's going to win me that fight. When they call me and say, hey, kid, the Dana White, hey, kid, you're going to take on Tatsuro Taira, then you got to switch your training camp like that, and you got 4 days. You gotta hope for something to go well there. And Hyun Sung Park, he just didn't get it, unfortunately. Now, what I did not expect there is for Tatsuro Taira to absolutely crack Hyun Sung Park in the, I believe, there's only 2 rounds. I think it was the first round, and drop it. I did not expect that. But on the same token, Hyun Sung Park probably wasn't expecting Tatsuro Taira to stand there and throw with him for too long, and he really didn't. But at the end of the day, good win for Tatsuro Taira. Not looking too much into it. But I believe the next opponent for Taira, I think it's got to be an Albazi rematch. He can't fight down in the rank. You look up in the rankings, Josh Van's going to fight Alexandra Pantoja. I mean, Brandon Moreno, he doesn't necessarily have a fight right now, but I think what they're going to do is they're going to do KKF versus Manel Kape. They're going to try to push Manel Kape, even though I'm pretty sure the UFC hates him because he pulls out of every other fight. Albazi's at the 4 spot. Tatsuro Taira, he already lost to Brandon Royval. Like, you can't have that immediate rematch. Brandon Royval, he'll probably fight down in the rankings. Somebody will have to come up to fight him. But I mean, right now, I think you do Taira versus Albazi. You do Josh Van versus Alexandra Pantoja. Assuming Pantoja wins, which, it's more likely than not. I think they have Moreno in case Kape can't get KKF done. You do Taira versus Albazi, and then you do Taira versus another guy for a title eliminator, whoever that may be. And you go from there. So that's kind of the flyweight picture right now. I can't see anything changing in the near future. However, the flyweight, it's getting interesting up there. You don't have Moreno versus Pantoja 7 or whatever coming out unless something crazy happens. But yeah, I'm excited for the future of the flyweights. But that's my breakdown of Park versus Taira and who I think the bigger names should be fighting next.